this is going to be the process on how to set up an LPA attached to a closer. This specific machine is on our lateral transfer models, but the setup will be the same. So for starters, you're going to take your can and place it at the outfeed of the closer. Now when here, the can should be touching the bottom roller. This does not have a lid on it. So that bottom roller should be low enough on the can where on the metal variation can, the roller should be just touching and slightly rolling on the top of that. So we're gonna lower it down until it does so. So that's not quite rolling on it, but I can feel friction. So just a tiny bit more lower. Okay, see how that roller is rolling now? That is exactly where we want this. It's going to be a little stiff by hand, but this is going to ensure that on the last 3 rollers, which is our ironing rollers, you will get a secure seal. So, now that that height has been set up, you want to come over to the lid placer and set this up. So, when you have a can inside the middle of your star rails should be centering the can underneath the lid placer. I'm going to loosen these bars up real quick. So your can should be centered underneath and in the middle, so that when you look straight down, you're going to get a centered lid every time. So with these star wheels, you should also have about 1/8 of an inch gap, so it wiggles just slightly, but not too much. And then the last thing when setting up the star wheels is they should flow freely, but they should not be overspinning. If they overspin, these lids are going to end up dropping on one of the points of the star wheels, and then you're going to have misplacement issues. So they should spin freely, but not too much, and they should be able to stop in a timely fashion. Now that friction concept also applies to the external star wheels, where they spin extremely freely, but at the same time, they're able to stop right away. So, that is the movement aspect of the star wheels. The next step that we're going to want to look at, let me get this can through here, is the height from the rollers. So, if you can look right there, let me get this camera in here. If you look right there, on the top of the can, those star wheels, the plastic portion is just above the lip of the can, and the metal portion rides along the edge, right like that. So that when it moves in with a lid on it that's mis-centered, the plastic portion of the star wheel will end up aligning the lid on top of the metal, right like so. Then underneath the escapement side of things, your can and your star wheels, the star wheels should be above the edge of the can, like I have here, but they should not be extremely high up. If your can is sitting at the bottom of the star wheels, your lid's going to have more ability to fall and misalign itself, and then it's going to have a higher chance of bouncing on the top of the can and falling off, or falling out of a place where the star wheels can't realign it. So that's going to be the setup of those, and then it's going to be able to go through the closer and close absolutely properly. Now this specific machine has a light sensor in order to trigger that lid. So the easiest way of timing these is with the conveyor running. The easiest way to get this in the right spot is to take these star wheels off, the ones that are right underneath the lid placer. The easiest way is to take one of these off, or both of them off, using this little hand knob here, and visually watching it go down onto the can as it's triggering the sensor, and it should drop directly onto the can as it's moving. If it's dropping a little bit too early or too late, you got to adjust that sensor to make up for that distance. Once it's dropping directly on the can how it should be, you can put these star wheels back on for your actual appropriate run. The last thing that we need to set up is this lid chute. So, if I grab a lid right here, the easiest way to set these up is to take your lid and push it. Let me just set it right there for now. So the easiest way is to push it up against these two bars and then have the third one just touching it. So, let me just get this right here. So we're going to push this up against the leading two bars and have the third one to where it's just touching that right there. And then I'm only going to tighten down this bar and this bar. I'm only going to tighten down these two. And don't be afraid to really crank those down. I am small, so I put my whole body weight into it to get that nice and tight. They should not move whatsoever. So that third one, you can see there's not really any friction on it and it's just touching that lid. I'm going to bring that in until there's just a tiny bit of friction on the bottom half of that. Let me see if I can get a better angle down here. So with that right there, I'm pushing it against the leading two bars on this side, and when I tip it, I should be able to feel that escapement scratching the side of the lid just barely, but not to where I have to force it in. So it shouldn't cause too much friction, but it needs to be tight up against that lid. So I'm going to bring that in just a little bit more in order to do so. And then I'm going to be able to tighten down this third one right like that. And that should be all set to go. They do have a little bit of movement ever so slightly. See how that's now causing some sort of an issue? It's really, really tight in there. We don't want that, so I'm just going to press it lightly, back that third one off, just enough to where it's good. And then you are set to load in all of your lids kind of above that setup lid. So the other thing that I need to note is when you're running, if you have this stack get too low, there's not necessarily enough weight on that lid, so you want to keep this stack stacked up fairly high. If you let it get too low and not enough lids in here, you're going to end up getting a higher chance of double dropping a lid, and it's going to cause more issues overall in your production run. So once you get your lids in here, if the top is a little bit wider, that's okay, just as long as this bottom escapement portion is nice and tight. And we do have these stacks able to go up fairly high. I would say don't let your stack get any lower than the cover of the lid before you're expecting to refill it. That's generally a pretty good height and a pretty good amount of lids to keep that fully filled and fully functioning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some water in these two cans and kind of show you how this setup functions and works properly. Okay, so on this specific machine, I've taken off the star wheels just to kind of get a concept of how that lid is going to drop onto the can. Currently, these sensors for this machine are set up in the correct spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a can through, I'm going to watch it. See how that dropped directly on the can? That's exactly what we want. So let me set up another one real quick. Alright, so even though that one wasn't directly on the can, that's still okay because it was still within the chine. And the star wheels will be able to relocate those on these cans. So just grab these out of here real quick. So now that I know for sure that star wheel, the spacing between the lid placer and the sensor is correct and that's dropping in the correct spot, I'm going to put all of my star wheels back on. So I know I've set those up correctly as well. So just put that back on real quick. This machine, this specific container is a quart container. if you have a smaller container on some of these machines, the one thing you have to be careful of is that these star wheels, they still need to have friction in order to work properly. But basically, if they've got too much, you're not going to be able to push a small container through. And then this closer height absolutely makes a difference. If that closer height is at a height where your can is starting to get stuck, that means your entire setup is set too low and your containers are not processing through correctly. So if you're having containers get stuck underneath this roller deck, my suggestion would be to raise this up just a touch so that your containers are still closing, but they've got less pressure in order to go through that. If your closer is set to the proper height, but your lid placer is either too high or too low, there are adjustment screws right here. You'll loosen these up and the ones further back on the deck, and you'll be able to adjust the angle between this lid placer and the closer to kind of fine tune that just the last little bit. Sometimes that gets out of whack, other times it is just fine and it still works properly. So now that we've got the star wheels on, we should be able to run our cans through, and it will process all the way through down to the end with a fully closed can. So that laid on a little funky. That star wheel was able to recover it, and that lid on that can fits nicely in there. It's nice and closed, there's no leaks, there's no issues. The can's a little wet from me just filling it. But overall, that setup of the star wheels and lid placer is absolutely perfect. So that falls right into the can. And that processes straight through, no issues, just like that.